And so we return and begin again. Welcome to the Invisible Podcast, issuesode 15. My name is Bob Z. You and me are going issue by issue, page by page, theory by theory, initiation point through Grant Morrison's 90s cosmic conspiracy classic, The Invisibles. We are on issuesode 15. 15, just to double check, deck 95. First of all, we're going to do the strength test. I have to say that at the start of the month, this one was pretty solid, but I've been reading it a fair few times since then, and the cover's come off. So this is a much loved issue and could possibly do with a little bit of extra resilience and robustness in its material binding, which would match the awesomeness that's inside the pages. Cover, this is the cover. You can see Sean Phillips has done another one of his minimal jobs. It looks fantastic, though. We've got the young Hildy kind of in the cave of initiation, if you like. We've got these lips here tilted to the side. We're going with vaginal, the word vaginal, guys, and we're loving it. And a lipstick there. This all plays into the iconography of the issue. Shouldn't need too much explaining. We are on She-Man, Part 3, Apocalyptic, by Grant Morrison and Jill Thompson. Just before we crack into the issue itself, got to say, obviously, a huge thanks to my lovely guest presenter, Sarah Horrocks, who was with us last month. You hopefully will have seen that episode and agree with me that Sarah was absolutely fantastic, offered insight into certain things which I am absolutely incapable of talking about, and is just generally a bloody good egg. And hopefully she'll come back on future episodes. If there are any other guests you want to see, and you think I could get, then, let me know. Why not? Come on, let's do it. If you want to be a guest, money. Not really, it's fine. So yeah, let's crack on. I can throw the middle guts away for a minute, because we're going into, of course, before we start the issue itself, we have to look at the advert on the inside front page. This is an advert for... Oh, sorry about any sound issues, by the way, this month. I'm aware that I'm using a slightly different microphone. There's a bit of a tinny tingle on some of the audio. Hopefully, I'm going to get a different microphone. That's my next kit upgrade priority, okay? We've got an advert here for Fair Game. Like a Joel Silver movie, like a kind of a trashy action film with a big budget from November 1990, opens November 3, from November 1995. It stars William Baldwin, the young Baldwin, I guess. The Baldwins aren't very famous over here, although they're very famous in America. One of them's on Saturday Night Live, and that's important, apparently. He makes jokes about the president guy, and we care about that. And Cindy Crawford, the supermodel Cindy Crawford, the lovely lady from the 90s, who I gather is still in fine fettle, which is nice. It's a Joel Silver movie, which means kind of trashy, but big budget explosions and stunts. You can rely on him to lay that on. The tagline that we've got on this rather generic-looking advert is, he's a cop on the edge, she's a woman with a dangerous secret. They've been targeted by the Russian mob, and now they're both fair game. These lines, he's a cop on the edge, she's a woman with a dangerous secret, they've been targeted, all very about the issue-y, all lots to go with there. Also, Stephen Burkoff is in Fair Game, and that's amazing. This is opening November the 3rd. There's another advert on the back, which I think came out for another film. There's an advert on the inside front cover, which we'll get to at the end, for another film, which I can see it here, but you can't, which I think came out in like September. The cover date on the issue is December, all of which is so as to say that I don't know when this issue came out. It was kind of autumn, maybe sort of Halloween-y time, 1995. Okay. So yeah, Fair Game. I haven't seen it. I did watch the trailer. It looks terrible. It looks really bad in a way which would be really fun. Looks like I could definitely enjoy, killing 89 minutes of my time with that here in 2020. Right, so we're on to page 1 of the issue itself. We're joined by Jill Thompson again. She has got these, and you notice it in comparison to like later pages in this issue. We're in Fanny's flat. Brody's on the phone. He's talking to who we will shortly find out is Sir Miles. But look at these big gaps. Look at these big panel gutters. Big, there's kind of like there's there's breathing, there's all sorts of like pregnant tense space inside the page itself, and then later we see these gaps in the panel layouts getting closed up and crammed in as everything gets claustrophobic and exciting, but at the moment we're kind of like dish, 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 and we're getting all of these nice beats really rhythmically placed by Jill Thompson to bring us into the issue, right? To kind of bring us up to speed at kind of a high pace. Note, Fanny's jaguar skin, her leopard print jacket, has been kind of just abandoned on the floor of her bedsit. Bedsit stroke flat, not quite clear, probably a small one bed flat, I think, rather than an actual bedsit. He's on the phone to Sir Miles. Is it happening at Christmas? We don't know, but he does. But Brody does allude to Christmas. He says, "Good news. This is up there with the angel and the shepherds watching their flocks by night." Sir Miles, obviously a reference to the famous Christmas Carol, with not the Annunciation, but the I don't know what the word is because I'm not that much of a good Christian. Of the angel Gabriel or Emmanuel or whoever going, shepherds, get yourself down to the barn, lads. It's you're in for a really big night. So he's on the phone to Sir Miles. He's on a mobile phone. It's very generic, and you can't quite see what kind of mobile phone it is. It's not that big. Is it like an early Nokia? Like, who knows? Here's a funny line here. Well, I think I've hit the jackpot here, 6 in a row, including the bonus ball, if you know what I mean. Obviously, the included bonus ball might relate to something that Fanny's packing. It's a lottery reference. This is like the National Lottery in the UK had only been going for literally 1 year when this came out. And it's kind of a joke because obviously you can't have all 6 numbers and the bonus ball. That's 7 numbers in total, and you only get 6. But at the time, there was still, a lot of suspicion, and there still is. Let's be honest, suspicion in like countercultural circles about the purpose of the lottery. It is basically, like a voluntary tax with a very kind of poor rate of return offered on it. But in the 25 years since this issue came out, the lottery has funded enough projects in the UK that are good, that people like, that means that, and it's just kind of accepted, it's just normalized to the point where people kind of accept the presence of the lottery and its increasingly high initial buy-ins to as part of just the way that money gets distributed in the UK. What else was I going to say about it? I think I had something else. Oh yeah, at this point though, it was still this was a very fresh reference because this was something which was real in the old UK media sphere that Brody and Miles would have been just about au fait enough to be talking to. This is a good bit of period dialogue where people were beginning to understand the process of the lottery, to be able to talk about it as a colloquialism, but also mess with the formula. He knows that you can't have 6 numbers plus the bonus balls, but it's a joke. It's realistic dialogue. It's the kind of thing people said. We see on our final panel that Fanny is still literally very much in the bad situation she was in our last page of the last issue, with the unsubtle penis gun substitute image thing of Brody still in her mouth. Page 2, we get our splash page, so let's do our credits. She-Man, Part 3, Apocalyptic. Grant Morrison, writer. Jill Thompson, pencils. Jill Thompson and Kim DeMulder on inks. Maybe that explains why this art in this issue is even better than it has been in the past few issues, which is very good indeed. Daniel Votso on colours and separations, Clem Robbins, the letterer, Julie Rottenberg, the associate editor, Stuart Moore, the editor, and The Invisibles, created by, of course, Grant Morrison. We are with Mictlantecuhtli and young Hildy. They are still in Mictlan. This is the night of Hildy's initiation at the big old pyramid. They're in, I can't remember where it is, Peru, I want to say? It's like Peru, Brazil, Mexico. It's Mexico, right? I don't know where it is, because this is, as we've discussed in previous episodes, this is all just a bit kind of South American. That's fine, but there's some great details here. So this is Mictlantecuhtli's obsidian chair a black chair carved from meteoric rock, and here are a bunch of hearts, kind of that they snack on down Mictlan way. They've been weighing them. I know it's a different thing, but what's interesting here is that Mictlan is like Mictlantecuhtli is huge, right? So if you think Hildy's about 13, she's like as tall as a 13-year-old boy would be. She barely goes up to his groin, let's call it, which means that Mictlantecuhtli is maybe a giant. So he's obviously a skeleton, but he's not a man skeleton. He's a giant man skeleton. So let's connect that in our minds to the rumours, if not actualities, of various giant-sized bones, giant-sized human skeletons, as if suggesting the existence of like a precursor human species that was fucking huge. As kind of you can see it. Is that what Samson's about in the Bible? Is that what Goliath is about in the Bible? Is that about all of these? Is that what the giants are about? More on giants later. Is that what giants are about in Norse mythology, or European folklore? Is he like? So basically, it's like, is Mictlantecuhtli not like a dead human god, but an extinct human god? That's kind of what I'm saying, right? Is that the gods are maybe giants, and this one's bony. I love how he's got this kind of like dunce's cap. I presume it's meant to be made of like human parchment. All of these bandagey things, and his hat. This is probably human skin that's been made into some sort of paper, right? It's a really atmospheric, really good shot. I know we saw him in the previous issues, and in fact we've seen him in previous. We've seen him in a few issues now, not just in this story arc. But I think Mictlantecuhtli's design, as rendered by Thompson, is fab. He's got all of the features and kind of visual interest that the good comic books should have. God damn it! I mean, this is good times. This is good storytelling. We're on to page 3. We are aware that we have got like they are looking in from page 1, from page 2, and page 3. They're standing in the land of the dead, so they are kind of outside the linear, normal, everyday human experience of time, right? So they're outside of that, they're outside of time and looking in on it, and are able to see different points in Hildy's life by looking, they're just looking out of the comic page at us, if you like. And that us that they can see includes, different points along the timeline, or the time super solid. So they're outside of time, they're outside of life, but they're not outside of existence itself, right? They're still inside the universe. So therefore, the dead, the land of the dead, isn't a place, they may be dead, but they're not gone, right? So they're still inside existence. They're still inside the unfolded universe, right? They may not be here where the humans and the mobile phones are, but they're not so far outside of it that they could be said to be inexistent. Hildy tries to impress him by pulling her pants down. He's like, whatever, I've seen everything, I'm the god of the dead. And she's like, I could just run past you. And then, if you do that, if you run past me, you will run into the arms of the Tsimimi, the star demons. That is something you would not wish to do. There is one here who knows you well. Would you like to see him? We're gonna sit with demon. I think that's okay. They can have positive kind of like defender like associations too, in kind of this like Mesoamerican Aztec lore stuff. They are kind of around at moments of crisis and change, but they are also kind of around during eclipses. They are almost like the Tsimimi, the star demons, or Tsimima, don't know. They're the presences which kind of like attack the sun and turn it black during moments of eclipse, right? But yeah, they are kind of around at moments of crisis and change. So when things are on the verge where they could maybe be going wrong, the Tsimimi are there to pounce. But maybe they're there to pounce in your favour if you can if you're on good terms with them. Fanny, it's safe to say, Hildy, as she is at this stage, isn't on good terms with this one, especially these. So we see three nasty looking Tsimimi here. One of them is Orlando. So it's important to remember that they're like star demons. Okay, so insofar as they are there to represent the stars in the night sky, which push the fates and destinies of humans, and and spirits, and the universe itself into or the enfolded world itself into certain paths, into certain shapes and configurations. They influence the destinies of man. They're only waiting to destroy this world because they kind of want to be there for the birth of the next world. But they're like the stars in the sky. They're almost like the horoscope, right? So they push and shape and are horrifically indifferent in a way, in a kind of a Lovecrafty way, but also what they do may be good for you. Yeah, it may work out fine. Not this one though. This is Orlando. I haven't quite been able to close the loop in my mind between Orlando the Aztec Tsimima here and the political wing of French nationhood, which is what he kind of has stood in for in the whole Invisibles cosmology yet. I haven't quite been able to work that out. Other than that, maybe like the Orlando thing was an invasion kind of injected into South American culture, Central American culture by the settlers. They took an Orlando with them, or something Orlando-like, a Portuguese Orlando. You know what I mean? He recognises Fanny from a few years hence. I will not stay here for long. I and all my brothers and sisters are returning to make you bleed and scream and cry. It's a cool setup for a nasty baddie who's going to come back one day. On the day of full motion, we will descend on you and devour all living things on earth. Pain on you, pain and pain and pain and pain. He's still very Clive Barkerish. He's still well into pain. But who's to say that new world the pain thing sounds bad, let's be honest, but the new world that's waiting for us on the other side of it, or not waiting for us, waiting for those who come after us on the other side of it, may be better. Maybe the day of full motion, or the entering into the fifth sun, or would it be the fifth sun, I think, it's not really ours to worry about, and the life there may be better. If we tie this into that Invisibles-y 20th, 21st century changeover cusp moment, we're allowed at this point, early 2020, to maybe say that the new world isn't that great for humans. I mean that's probably just my sort of cynical, slightly gothy take on things. If you look at the big picture, then maybe you can make a case that human life is more positive and brilliant than it ever has been. I'm not sure that's right though. And I don't think we actually have gone into the fifth world yet. I think this late 20th century millennial moment, it has eventually just been kind of stretched into the 21st century, and we're not there yet at that point of new world. Well, although catch me on a different day. Hildy's like, I don't know him, and Mictlantecuhtli's like, nah, but you will, and you'll call me to come and save you, and now you got to pay up. And she's like, but why have I got to pay up now? It hasn't happened yet. But yeah, you've got nothing to offer me. You're just going to stay here now. You're just going to be dead. You're just in the land of the dead. That means you're dead. You're not doing your sorcerer's initiation. You're just dead. You're here now in the land of the dead. And she's like, no, I will tell you a joke in exchange for my freedom. And he's like, oh, it's great. The way he's sitting forward on his chair is you're like, oh, she's kind of, the god of the dead isn't used to. He may not be phased by young girls who've got male genitalia, but he is phased when one of them has got the balls, pardon the pun, to say, "Well, I'll tell you a joke, and then you'll let me go in exchange for my life." That's like cunning stuff. Fanny's being awesome here. Young Hildy, rather. She's not really Fanny yet. And our final caption is "The demons are laughing." Over on the next page, we have an ad break for this movie, Strange Days. That's Ralph Fiennes with his lovely leonine hair. "You know you want it" is the tagline for this advert. This is, Strange Days. You've seen Strange Days. It's got Ralph Fiennes. It's got Angela Bassett. It's got Juliette Lewis. It's directed by Catherine Bigelow from a James Cameron script. So it's all there. It's a pretty big budget movie from what I can remember. I've not seen it for a long time. But there's a lot of like very, very, very late 90s stuff on screen. It's kind of set in like 1999, but obviously it's coming out in like late 95, early 96. And we're not forgiving Catherine Bigelow for the Bin Laden torture porn movie. We're not forgiving her for that. Bad person. Sorry, bad person. Not forgiving. And it was a flop, right? It was a little bit, the script is maybe a little bit too sort of chewy, but people love it now. It's like a very well-liked cyberpunk movie, possibly one of the most real kind of meldings of what the aesthetic of cyberpunk sort of looked like in its moment, and before we kind of got to the sort of vapor wavy steam cyberpunks as it actually turned out. They weren't there's a lot of like 90s leather and chrome in Strange Days from what I can remember, but not many like Apple products, not much kind of iPad or iPhone styling, not much clean round white lines. So the aesthetic here is like it's an invention, right? It's not what we actually got, but there's something very appealing about what people thought we were going to get. It's quite rough and nasty, if I remember. There's some maybe like sexual violence in it that a non-female director wouldn't be able to get away with. Zero Dark. I've got notes here. I've got really long notes about how bad Zero Dark 30 is. Frankly, disgusting act of historical falsehood. I was pretty highfalutin when I was writing my notes earlier, apparently. A repulsive moral defense of torture. I don't want to harsh anybody's rewatch of Point Break, but it is a fact. Catherine Bigelow is not okay, guys. I remember from Strange Days that there's some kind of nasty sexual violence-y virtual reality stuff in it, or kind of like you're jacking in, you're kind of sharing somebody else's lived experience, and that's where the virtual reality bit comes in. The slippages that brings in terms of media and society and identity does capture a lot of the anxieties, not just kind of when we were looking ahead at the digital revolution, but the ones we would actually get. So it's very Invisiblesy, and it's actually very 21st century-y, and probably a great film that would reward a rewatch. The VR stuff is obviously very Invisiblesy. We will get to that in a few years, and this connects great, right? Would you like me to tell you a joke? Hildy says to Mictlantecuhtli, the god of the dead. He says, "What? You know you want it." That could very easily be Hildy's next line of dialogue. This exchange could be happening in the break between the pages in our little ad break. So it's good. It's good. It's a good advert. It's well placed. In the last issue-sode, Sarah went way further than I thought. That somebody was actually deliberately placing these adverts and even designing the adverts to fit with the content of these issues of The Invisibles. I'm sure that isn't true, but I love the fact that she was able to get more carried away with this than even I am, and I worry that I get too carried away sometimes, and that she recognises that these ad placements do have a really interesting kind of level of textual interplay with the issues of the Invisibles themselves. So it's a good thing, and that's why it's good to be going through these issues rather than going through the books, right? Rather than going through the collected editions. Over on the next page, we've got another ad break. It's our regular trip to Sam Goody Music Land. The two albums that we've got on our plate this month are Gorgeous George by Edwyn Collins and Coast to Coast Motel by G Love and Special Sauce. The first of these, Gorgeous George by Edwyn Collins, is not one of my favourite albums, but I will say, but one of my wife's favourite albums. And without any sort of exaggeration, it's obviously a brilliant record. A Girl Like You was kind of such a big hit over here and so ubiquitous for such a long time throughout the entire summer of 1995 that it became a bit annoying. And I heard it again the other day on the re-listen, obviously doing my duty for this here podcast. And on the re-listen, I was like, this is such a good song. It's such a good song. The kind of the big clanging guitars, the famous line about there being too many protest singers and not enough protest songs, the big sort of echoey sort of wall of sound almost production of it. It's kind of this strange 60s beat tone that kind of ripples through it as well. It's a great song. The rest of the rest of the album doesn't reach the same heights as that, in all honesty, but there are at least 4 or 5 other really, really good songs on there. It does quite an important thing insofar as it brings the 80s blue-eyed soul genre mode of British guitar-based jangle pop, which was being revived in the 90s. The way that it kind of brings that up and puts it in the mix, makes it available again, is something that no one else was able to do. No one else was able to basically the 90s Britpop thing was about multiply redigesting the previous 30 years of British guitar music culture. But the 80s people just skipped over, apart from a few Smiths riffs, which the really bad Britpop bands like Shed 7 or whatever were desperately hoping that nobody had noticed that they were just very clearly ripping off. But the much later and very popular sort of trends that were dominant, like this blue-eyed soul thing that Edwyn Collins was kind of involved in, but not he wasn't one of the main sort of lights of that movement, but he does bring that sound into this album. He's kind of more of a new pop guy, right? Which was able to kind of bring that soul piece in, but didn't rely on it. He does it here. Nobody else was able to metabolize the 80s in the 90s except for him, having been there and still being here. It's a really great album. I would definitely recommend a listen. A Girl Like You is an absolute stand-up, Bangaroony, one for the ages. There's a bunch of other really good songs on there too. Gorgeous George, I didn't know what this was about, but it fits quite well with our themes about sort of glamour and queerness in this here story arc that we're dealing with currently. Gorgeous George was a wrestler, and he was the wrestler that popularized wrestling as a TV spectacle in the US, and he did it by being camp, basically. He did it, pardon me for that, whatever that noise was. He did it by being camp. He wore capes and makeup, and he was kind of very sort of feminine, kind of presented this sort of very sort of queeny kind of I don't know if he was gay or not. I think he might have been. The details around his personal life are fairly sketchy online. He presented this outrageous, glittery, glamorous, subversion of traditional feminine modes kind of thing, style into wrestling of all places, which meant that the crowds would hate him, but it created very, very big stir. He invented Liberace, basically. He invented Little Richard. He invented glitter and glam as a presentational mode for men in showbiz. Before pop music did it, before rock and roll did it, before Las Vegas did it, Gorgeous George did it in wrestling of all places. And I'm not into wrestling, but it's kind of its place within as a thing that has forced forward not just our geeky cultures, but our mass representational ones as well, our mainstream ones. is actually probably something that's really interesting to get your teeth into, and the story of Gorgeous George, which is explored a little bit on this here album, is a really interesting one. The other one, excuse me, the cold that I was nursing in our last episode did turn into full-blown flu. I was properly out of it for about 5 days, and it's settled into just like annoying, lingering infection on the chest. So I'm coughing a lot. My apologies. I am at UK coronavirus ground zero. I do not have, touch wood, coronavirus. I'm okay. I hope you're okay too. The other album is G11 Special Sauce, Coast to Coast Motel. I saw them at a festival I was like, I saw them in 1995. I saw them in 1995. I did. And then I looked up when I saw them. It was 2000. I was out by 5 years. So that goes to tell you what my memory of the events of the 1990s are like, for all the right reasons. Thanks. G11 Special Sauce, Coast to Coast Motel. Okay, so what this did was, I don't think it particularly ties into this issue, but do you remember the House of Blues adverts that we've been having for the previous the previous 2 issuesodes? There's been an advert for House of Blues, that TV show, like Live from the House of Blues, and Sarah was able to enlighten an ignorant Brit about this being an actual place and maybe even a chain of places. It struck me listening to this, young, kind of nice, middle-classy white guys doing guitar-based pop, which, isn't afraid to kind of look at negative emotions, but also is doing it within a recuperated, established mode of expression, blues, basically, but given this kind of like white guy, shambolic, kind of lo-fi sort of spin. It struck me that this was maybe meant to be a container for the negative emotions thrown up by the Cobain event, which, as we've seen in previous Sam Goody Musicland adverts, the American rock music scene of the time was struggling very hard to metabolize. Maybe they thought for a bit that the blues was a way to recover from the intensity of grunge, and that this was a potentially like a really good way forward, like a good thing to have. A form of music that could be happy and sad at the same time, and cover those seeming contradictions in a way which was fun and sellable and would relate to a lot of people. And this feels a bit hastily done as an advert, as an idea of that. Like they had a lot of money thrown at it, not a lot, but obviously they were like, these guys, G11 Special Sauce, are pretty good. It's not convincing. It's not bad. You can tell that the album's got like a vibe, and they've kind of got a little bit of, and it's got some thought behind it. And some of some of the rhythms and the vibes, they're okay. You can kind of get them for a bit, and you're like, yeah, this is all right. I can imagine sitting on my porch, smoking a spliff and drinking a beer, and just sort of soaking up this song and having this on, and it being okay. Watching the world go by, making a wry comment with my buddies. It doesn't not work in its own terms, but as kind of anything with any ambition sort of beyond itself, it's a bit hasty, a bit ill-conceived, a bit of like basically going, why don't we get the kids to sing the blues because this grunge stuff is killing them? Nah, not convincing, doesn't work, not an appropriate response. So that's G11 Special Sauce, Coast to Coast Motel. Not a rubbish album, but interesting for its failures, I guess. Interesting insofar as the places where it went wrong are kind of interesting too. And that's the end of the ad break. We are on to page 5 already on to page 5. We're ripping through it this month. Heavy, obviously on this page. Heavy, Eyes Wide Shut, stroke The Shining vibes. Now, obviously, all of this is happening 4 years before Eyes Wide Shut came out. Grant Morrison the Invisibles is building the scenery that we would become familiar with through Eyes Wide Shut, using. So this is like this bit. Okay, so this is the Eyes Wide Shut bit, pulling up to the mansion. The sex worker who doesn't know what's going on, or the kind of the guest who doesn't know what's going on and is a sex worker. And then, so Morrison's using The Shining to build Eyes Wide Shut 5 years in advance. It's amazing, frankly, because of the animal masks, yeah, like in The Shining, yeah. It's really something. It's quite shocking, this page, actually. Not just because these faces are really creepy and scary, except for the sad dog. The sad dog. Remember the sad dog from the last episode, who leads, the yellow one, who leads Fanny into the land of the dead. This sad dog's got quite a sad expression and kind of almost like concern in his eyes. The rest of the animals, the cat, the goat, the rat or mouse, actually, it's more like a mouse, but it's still creepy, and the pig, who like they're obviously horrible, but this guy's a bit more soulful. There's theories about who this dog might be, and we'll get to that in a few years' time. But if we were in Egypt, right, the dog would be eating the bucket of hearts in the land of the dead, right? The cynocephalic presence, the dog-headed one, right? And wrong page. And yeah, dog-headed things, generally maybe helpers, not necessarily something to be scared of. Maybe like dogs are man's best friend after all. But so if we skip our ad break interlude, we noticed that the last thing we saw before we got to this page was the demons are laughing. And then Fanny can hear them laughing. So these demons here, right, they're very clearly, and they've got white suits on and stuff. So, they're very clearly identified with the Tsimime, yeah, with the Tsimime, however you say it. If you were looking for some Illuminati / New World Order tale telling, there's a big chunk of the puzzle that Morrison gives you here. They dress up like animals because it makes them like demons, right? Now, okay, so, and also, we've got this kind of crabby one here, which is obviously, there's a big bunch of stars, which are like a crab, and we've got a goat here, a rat. Pretty sure there's a rat asterism, isn't there? Actually, I'm rubbish at that stuff. The reason that the Illuminati guys dress up as animals is because it makes them like demons, which are like stars. Okay, there's quite I admit that's quite a complicated chain to follow through, and it sounds like I'm reaching here. It's obviously what this page is telling you, and the previous page as well. Okay, don't dismiss that. We need to look into the details on this page too. Here, check out the orb. Right now, I think that's obviously meant to be like a crystal ball. It's meant to be like a scrying object where you could capture, maybe extract even a supernatural entity from, or a portal that one could see a supernatural entity through. And you can't really see it because the cat's standing in the way, but there's also like a person or an arm. There's a person here, someone is here, chained up. So this orb, right? I know I just said it's like a crystal ball, but also it's the orb that Donald Trump and the Saudi royal family were like clutching when Trump made his first presidential visit to Saudi, right? Creepy. The creepy New World Order shit is really, really happening. But yeah, loads going on in this scene. We won't get to it for years, but it's really important, these little details. And this kind of night of Fanny's initiation, in a way, it's like, all of these events in Fanny's life are part of her ongoing process of initiation. This is the one that happens when she's 19 or whatever it is. And it's a bad one, but it's also a very big one. Like this page connects to a load of places where we're going to end up later. So think on that if you want. Also, remember how she was vulnerable on page 1 and she's lost her jaguar skin coat? She hands up her fur here. So she's not using that kind of demon energy when she walks into the room. She's very vulnerable. And the look on her face here is terrifying. Jill Thompson's art is fantastic. Like I keep saying, it is so true. Okay, over the next page. I'm on to page 6. We're back in Fanny's flat, and it's all fairly self-explanatory on this page. Note that Brody is still using female identifiers for Fanny. She plays dumb to buy herself a few moments. He's like, sorry, love, it's all business, nothing personal. And you're a bloody good kisser. You're like, there's something weirdly sort of fluidly queer about Brody's sexuality here. And he's like, yeah, he's this kind of pantomiming of maleness with all of these sort of subtle queernesses and polymorphousnesses underneath. We'll talk about more about that when he meets his opposite number a bit later. And she's like, and what I love about Fanny here is that she gives him like big doe eyes and is like, oh, what are you talking about? I thought we were just going to go for each other. I thought it was cool. And he's like, oh yeah, sorry. And as soon as he takes the gun away, oof, she nuts him in the nuts. Oof, headbutts him in his balls and jumps straight after him. Like, Fanny is obviously in a very vulnerable position here, and she's well up for it. She's having none of it. This is the kind of like fiery, defiant energy that you would expect Dane to be doing, right? But she's with all the yellow hair, but she's doing it, and I love her for it. That she just totally goes for it. Unfortunately, Brody is hard as nails, and he reacts very quickly, gets his feet up, and gives her a solid kick. She tries to recover her balance, but she twists on her high heels, and he says, high heels, crap in a fight. Which is funny, right? Because when she jammed her stiletto into Orlando's head a few issues back, they weren't. We know that high heels aren't crap in a fight, but, everything, a time and place for everything, right? And now Fanny gets kicked in her nuts too. You've got balls, I'll say that for you. I felt them right through my steel toe caps. He's horrible. Now, how about he's just about to properly smack her. Now, interesting martial arts nerd fact here, right? He is, the way see how he's got his, it's not a normal fist, it's not a fat fist. He's got his thumb out. That's that's Ipin Ken. That's a karate fist for like if you're a peasant in Japan and there's a samurai who's like taking a piss and he's got like quite tough bamboo armor. You need like an extra point of penetration to be able to get through the armor. So it's gonna hurt though. But that's what these kind of extended knuckles are about. And we'll see. But there's nice martial arts nerd detail here in the contrasting fighting styles that King Mob and Brody use, and we'll see a bit later in a minute. And but he doesn't even get a chance to use this. Like punching Fanny in the face with that would have really hurt. It would have messed her up. But he doesn't get a chance to do that because King Mob's arrived. Didn't your mother tell you it's not polite to hit a lady? He's got his full 90s Lennon glasses on and everything. And we can breathe a sigh of relief because tough guy's here now. And that kind of, that's what we wanted. For all of, Fanny having a good go. Right. This page is horrible. So we cut back to Fanny, just young, like middle young Fanny, just after the scene that we saw of her entering into the orgy from hell with the orb. They obviously didn't give her a terribly good time. She's obviously been she's obviously been raped. And the blood and stuff here is horrible. Remember how the earlier point of her initiation, they had to kind of do a fake menstruation in order to trick the spirits into thinking that she wasn't, not that she was female, but that she wasn't male. And we've talked about how these ritual woundings can be used in circumcisions, even can be like unmailing things, which make the spirits a bit less. It makes the spirits that naturally hate men a bit less sure that they're dealing with a man, so they maybe are a bit more kind of likely to give you an easier time. The detailing on the blood and stuff is horrible. She's in real pain. She walks again through feathers and stuff here. These are theriomorphs again, but they're aviomorphs. So they're people dressed up as animals, but they're birds, which wasn't happening on the previous page. Got this big bird head watches her go through the crowd here, and it seems kind of indifferent, but I don't think it is. I think actually it's quite a friendly bird. Quetzalcoatl is obviously the feathered serpent god, kind of like the hero god in a way of all of this Aztec-ish mythology that we're dealing with. Mesoamerican. There's all these birds, all this bird iconography on this page. Quetzalcoatl is kind of like not an enemy, but like somebody who kind of, he's like a hero, culture hero god, with all of these like interesting sun and stellar associations too. He went to Mictlan and he made human beings out, and this is covered in Fanny's little quick preamble into the suns, the worlds, the four suns. Quetzalcoatl went to the Mictlan, found the remains of the dead sun, used it to make humans with, and then when he'd kind of made humans, gone, ta-da, check out the new world that I've made, disappeared into the sky and became Venus, the morning star, or the evening star, indeed, in some depending on time here. And here, Quetzalcoatl, the big serpent pal of humans, like bird serpent, dinosaur-y, Jurassic Park-y, feathered stuff going on. Remember, he's involved, and we haven't seen him. We've seen Tezcatlipoca, we've seen Mictlantecuhtli, obviously, seen a few others, seen Itzpapalotl, and it's him in there, but Quetzalcoatl's involved here, and maybe very intimately involved with what Fanny's going through right now. Okay, and she's it's the carnival. She's in Rio. She's getting a lot of looks, but no one's helping. It's carnival in Rio. The pain is so bad. Am I dying? Am I dead? Bless her. She's asking herself. Westerners think of Brazil as being this very sort of sexually free country, but for whatever reason, has pretty uncool ideas about trans people. Brazil murders more Brazilian trans people get murdered in Brazil than anywhere else in the universe. 130 people trans people murdered in 2019. So what's that? That's like more than 2 a week. It's not okay. So she's in very serious danger here. Like, just because she's not, she's been thrown out of a speeding car. She's just been raped by some horrible posh people in a mansion, and she's still in really bad danger. But there's this creature here is maybe keeping an eye on her. Over on the page, we've got another ad break. It's Changeling, the storytelling game of modern fantasy, as Sarah very well pointed out in last issuesode. This stuff here matches up to our invisible themes and icons very well. The gates of Arcadia, the original paradise, are closed to you. Without any awareness of your true nature, humankind crushes you beneath its banal hill. It really couldn't be coming at a better time in the issue this time round either. Joy and laughter are gone. The only hope lies in the dreams of man. And then a super goth picture here. This could be very easily coming out of Mictlantecuhtli's mouth, narrating Fanny's process. And this is how Fanny feels, right, at this point. All of her glamorous makeup is kind of curdling and turning into black and death and all the gothic good stuff. And she's entering the world of darkness, maybe. Or, is she going to escape from the world of darkness, which is where she is. Like, good advert placement again. Oh, on the next page, we've got another advert for Fritz Lieber's Ill Met in Lankmar. It's part of White Wolf's Publishing's. This is what they're pushing this month. They're doing reprints of classic sword and sorcery tale, Ill Met in Lankmar, which is kind of like from 1970 by Fritz Lieber. It's part of the Fafard and the Grey Mouser stories. I've never read them. I don't know whether they're any good or not. I don't like sword and sorcery, really. I don't like it, really. I'm sorry. I don't like it really. So I'm not particularly interested in this advert. I will say that Fritz Lieber was a Lovecraftian, a member of like Lovecraft's circle. There is some interesting. This is their like origin story, Ilmet in Lankmar, but it's told. This 1970. It was written. The first of these Fafhrd and the Grey Mouse stories came out in like the 40s, if not before, maybe in the late 30s. So there's a bit of like non-linear storytelling stuff happening here, and I reckon if you dig into the Fafhrd, the Grey Mouser, see, that's just a really annoying word. Just don't like it. Fafhrd. What's the name of your hero in your sword and sorcery novel, Fritz? It's Fafhrd. Oh, I think I'm going to read Conan. I'm not, actually. I don't want to read Conan any more than I want to read Fafhrd. But if I had to choose between the two, you're going to go with the one whose name doesn't sound like that, right? So these are probably Lovecraftian, insofar as they probably exist within the same realm as Cthulhu and pals. And as we've established, so does the Invisibles. So the Invisibles is a Lovecraftian piece of fiction, and I think Fafhrd, the Grey Mouser, Ilmet in Lankmar, is too. So there's a connection there. More importantly than any of that is there's an annoyingly small shot of it, but can you see that? There's like a mid-90s original illustration by Mike Mignola on the cover of this like reprinted edition of Fafhrd the Grey Mouser by White Wolf Publishing, and you can't really see it, but it looks brilliant. Mike Mignola, obviously, Hellboy guy. That's a piece of Lovecraftian fiction too. Love Mike Mignola's art, and it's always great to see it, especially when like somebody said to him, "Yeah, can you do the background?" And he's gone, "Okay, that's important. Sorry." It looks great. It's really good. I'm not keen on Sword and Sorcery. I'm not going to read that. I'm never going to read that. Okay. Page 9. There's not much of it happening in this issue because I kind of think the whole point is that as Jill Thompson's style starts to kind of become more about Fanny, right? The experiments where Morrison is deliberately giving her different comic book styles and idioms to draw in become less important. Nevertheless, this is happening, and you can maybe say, like, I don't think that a lot of the stuff of like, yeah, this was like a Love and Rockets page layout style, or I don't think a lot of that was terribly convincing ever, or that different from just how Jill Thompson would draw anyway, to count. So you could say that there are some Love and Rockets pages in this issue too, but really the only kind of I'm going to make Jill Thompson draw like somebody else bit in this issue is this page here, page 9, which is obviously based upon page layout from Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 16 panels on the page. The first 4 are like a TV report with the narration above, and then lots of tight close-ups in the following 12 to kind of make things nice and tense, even though it's a bit of a filler page, and although we learn a lot, it loops us back, and the way it's packed into these little panels makes it feel quite like makes it feel quite sort of panicky and important. We get an interesting story, right? So it obviously loops back to our first page of this issue because he has the phone call with Brody that we just saw Brody have, where he talks about the lottery and Christmas. Smiles has got, we learn loads. Smiles has got a black eye. Smiles has got psychic powers, and he's using it to fuck up one of his lackeys, Pennington. This one's called. He's like a new Tarquin. Remember Tarquin from issue 11, the Royal Monsters one? And the news report is about some bombs going off in central London, which have killed some people. And the IRA have denied all knowledge. That's quite good, that, right? Because this is 1995. It's a second reference in 2 issues to the Troubles in Northern Ireland, if we count the reference to the Crying Game previously, yeah. This is late 1995, so we're over a year into the 1994 ceasefire. Still a couple of years away from the Good Friday Agreement, but this is a very peaceful time in the IRA's London bombing campaign. So to have this up is, it's quite, a bombing in Northern Ireland at this time would be out of the blue and would be a bad idea. That would have ruined the peace process, or set it back at least. But let's also have a look at the stuff that's happened, right? So I don't know whether. So this was September, October, November. I would say between October and November, this issue was published. Middle of October would be my bet. November the 24th. This is all real life stuff. This isn't comics now. The Irish government voted to allow divorce. November the 28th, Bill Clinton addressed Belfast City Hall and called the terrorists, the Invisibles are terrorists, remember, yesterday's men. In early December, Seamus Heaney won the Nobel Prize. On December the 15th, Playboy goes on sale in Ireland for the first time in 36 years. And in December the 16th, the euro has officially been adopted as the name of the currency of the European Economic Union. I don't even think it was just called EU at that point. I think it was called the EEU, of which Ireland is obviously a member. There's loads going on in a very narrow space of time, just when this issue lands, around this kind of new constitution of Ireland as an entity. And obviously Morrison's just kind of riffing on it a bit, with a bit of colour, to add about, a bomb going off in London, is it the IRA? But but this is really current and important. And I hadn't noticed until I started doing these rereads with you, dear reader, viewer, listener, how concerned with building nations the Invisibles is, but it is. So this Irish reference is really pointy at this point. At this point in our narrative, at this point in human time. We also get another reference to Orlando, which is obviously relevant here too, right? Because Orlando is the thing, as we just discussed, that builds the French state, or the French nation, or the French draws those French borders. So Orlando has been, it's like a denial that the murders that Orlando did in London actually happened, or that there was a man in a white suit involved. Apparently that wasn't really it. But we get another mention of Orlando. We learn that there's some explosion stuff that's to do with the bloody McGowan brat. So Dane has been setting off bombs in London and given Samar's black eye. I can't wait to find out. It's great, it's a good, surprising page. It kind of sets you up for a load of stuff which you can infer very quickly is happening between the panels. And you're like, I want to know what went on there. I hope we don't have to wait too long. We don't. What else? Yeah, Miles has got psychic powers. We know that he was a baddie, and he was evil, but we didn't know quite how kind of dangerous he was. But it turns out that just with doing a little bit of X-Men here, he can give Pennington a headache. So that's good. Okay, so he's a bit more than just a posh guy. He's not very nice. Pages 10 and 11. I think these pages work best as a spread. We can probably think about them both at once. And it's kind of all on the page. So in Fanny's lowest moment, she discovers her highest self, really. And this is this is Tlazoltliotls, her, the butterfly thing on her head. That's Tlazoltliotls. Love saying it. Lesson. I have made you strong and wise and incorruptible. I have shown you the worst there is and made you free. It's kind of that simple, basically. That's what Fanny's magic power is. I love how the ladders in her tights. It happens on the carnival page as well, but here it's a bit, because she's standing upright, it works a bit better. You can see how she's got Mictlantecuhtli's feet. She's got legs made of bone. She's a witch. She's half in the land of the dead. And there's a really nice detail here where her boob is kind of popping out here, and ever since she's been thrown out of the car. And remember, that was a really important kind of piece of her sort of feminine being that she sacrificed shortly before calling Mictlantecuhtli in order to get rid of Orlando. And here she puts it in, right? She's reclaiming it as a part of herself here, which is nice kind of iconography. Not too much is made of it, but it's good, and it's in the comic, and it's clever. But yeah, there's a bit of a tragic queer stereotype here, maybe. that like suffering is natural to people who defy gender binaries and stuff. Not happy with that. I mean, you know, this is part of the representation of like queer characters in comic book culture piece that we were talking about last time, that Sarah was able to talk about so well. That your gay character, also like her superpower is that she suffers all the time, but she kind of just rises above it through because she knows how bad things can get. Is a bit. It does play into that stereotype bit, but we're forgiving it. But it is there. And then at the end, a man in a white suit. Hang on a minute, we were just told about a man in a white suit being scary. John O'Dreams turns up in a white suit to recruit her into the Invisibles on the very same night she's just been raped by a bunch of New World Order demons who were also wearing white suits. John O'Dreams has got the same colour eyes as Dog Guy here, but different hair and a different suit. So he's not him. Same colour eyes, slightly different shape though. Almond-ear eyes on John O'Dreams. He's got so this would be happening in about 1991, I think. Well, like our main narrative is happening in like 95, about 4 years ago, I think. Yeah, 1991. This is happening. He's got very 1991 hair, very curtains, very curtains. We like John O'Dreams for trying, but we don't like his hair. Okay. Back in the room, back in the present day, back in Fanny's flat. Oof, Oda, hell are you? Our burly lads go at it. Big scrap here between Brody and King Mob. It's really brilliantly paced couple of pages. We pick up this detail. I couldn't really make it out 2 issues ago, but it's quite clearly an Archie comic here. Archie is a very deep cut by Fanny. Fanny comes from the Americas, obviously. So she would be more likely to know about Archie comics than anybody else in the UK, because Archie posters on your wall in the 90s in London were not a thing. They were not a thing. But Fanny knows her shit because she's cool. She's got serious geek power on there. It's a cool reference. People know about it now. Archie's a thing. I'm not convinced it's a terribly necessary, interesting thing, but Archie's a thing now that people in the UK do know about. It's more just because they just needed something to put something on, right? You need an existing property. You've got to re-territorialise. You can't make anything new. Really good fight. You'll notice a few details that King Mob was moving in circles a bit. Brody is a bit more direct. Brody isn't afraid to use his environment around him. We're basically meant to see here a slight difference in fighting styles. Brody's using like a hard style. He's like karate, as we would imagine, as we established earlier. Also, oh no, I forgot what it's called. Maybe like Defendu or whatever. He's probably been trained to fight by the SAS. I mentioned this before, we're getting very strong SAS vibes from Brody. So he's probably been trained in hand-to-hand combat in the art of Defendu, which a couple of like crazy British dudes invented. Or what's the other one? I can't remember it. Gwashi Katang or something. Can't remember. Brody swears when he hits, right? King Mob goes, huh! He does like Bruce Lee sounds. Sure. They're both doing kind of the same thing. Getting air out to kind of to project more energy into your strike, and also make sure that your lungs are empty of air, so that if you get hit, you don't get winded. He's using these kind of like very sort of spiritual looking kicks, instead of these kind of like much more brutal, like cheaty. It's not really cheating to pick up a lamp and use it. That's just clever. Fight moves. We've never seen King Mob be anything other than completely invincible. So to see Brody basically kind of coming out a bit on top in this 2-page exchange, is quite an eye opener. We're like, whew. And what I really like about this is that they're both out of breath. That like they've only been fighting for a couple of seconds really, and they're both really because fighting takes out of you like really, really quickly. Fighting is like a very, very hard thing to do. That's why MMA games are only 3 rounds. Right? If you're properly fighting, your energy goes very, very quickly. And Brody realizes that he's King Mob, which excites him. Compliments him on his fighting style. Nice little footwear details. You know, they've both got kind of like heeled shoes on, but King Mob's a bit more Cuban. We're seeing two contrasting images of tough guy masculinity here. They're both very male. They're both very tough and strong and active, you know, in that kind of masculine energy way. This is the 90s and we like it. And this is a weird 70s, 90s and we don't like it. Okay? This is what these fights are doing. Hard style, soft style. Swearing, or just doing Bruce Lee stuff. Even though that's obviously pretty 70s itself, right? But, you know, even as recently as last year with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Bruce Lee was still being used as this example of softer masculinity that was opposed to the kind of the all-American Marlboro Man cowboy hero that's exemplified by Brad Pitt's character, right? Basically because Bruce Lee is shorter than the American ideal and graceful. You know, he moves like a dancer, and that kind of that made him an alternative model and a kind of a threatening model for masculinity. On the next page, we are back in the land of the dead, and the joke that Hildy promised a few pages back, we get now. Turns out that this young Brazilian girl has got the same sense of humour as like an edgy 90s Glaswegian. She tells him like a funny joke about cot death babies, which is very shocking, cancelable, one could say. But obviously he's the Lord of the Dead. He's got quite a dark sense of humour. And so he, in exchange for the joke, he lets her go, or lets her continue on through the land of the dead. Good points to raise on this. I love the look on his face here, where when he hears the joke and he looks a bit shocked or confused or whatever before deciding that it's funny and he likes it. Even better is the disapproving look on Mictlantecuhtli's wife's face, where she's like, "This is crude humor." She's called Mictlantecuhtli. She's got a fantastic name, Mictlantecuhtli. Mictlantecuhtli. And she's like, I don't really approve of this. And I'm tempted to say that Hildy's joke isn't that funny, but Mictlantecuhtli has kind of knows that if he acts like it's funny, it's going to annoy his wife a bit, and so he definitely goes, yeah, it's funny. Interesting insight into like the domestic politics of the overlords of the land of the dead. So Fanny kind of goes past the throne room and into the garden. Mictlantecuhtli gives her some advice. He says, "We gods are only masks. Who wears us? Find it out." I think on this page, this is page 15 now we're on, I think, contrary to what I said about the Dark Knight Returns page a couple of pages ago, you could make a case that this page is maybe another Ripley's Believe It or Not style page. These lovely kind of fading out, panelless, borderless panels, as Hildy kind of squeezes in like a lifetime of several lifetimes of like badass witchy initiations. She drinks from the menstrual blood of the life tree. She scratches her tongue with a rose that grows on the bones of the dead and learns the language of animals. No, she learns the secret common language of shamans, that language whose words do not describe things but are things. Now that's something that pops up again and in a big way in the Invisibles much later. But basically, yeah, Fanny gets super badass witchied up over the course of this quick page. And the the descriptions of the land of the dead that are given, and these kind of strange spirit objects that she encounters and absorbs is great. But then she is kneeling down to drink of the flux. That's the menstrual flux of the tree of life. When she hears a story, so we got more blood, right? She's got blood around. There's lots of blood around her mouth. Okay, this is all more vaginal symbolism stuff, like we had on our cover. Yeah. She is kneeling down to drink of the flux when she hears a strange sound, vibrating knives and the humming ring of great wings. And looking up, this is over on page 16, and looking up, she comes face to face with the obsidian butterfly, the terrible goddess, Papalotl. Papalotl is concerned with the areas of the land of the dead that are for dead children, and especially for dead infants. Now, so it's interesting that she's been called in by Hildy's taboo-busting joke about the death babies a couple of pages ago. So she's like, "Oh, we think that's funny, do we?" And she's here to have a go. Obviously, her nickname, the Obsidian Mirror, is very metal. We like that name a lot. But she's kind of like one of the sublords of the lands of the dead. She also tends to women who die in childbirth. So she is, in a way, a representative of Hildy's own mother, who died in childbirth, right? And Hildy's got her red mouth. She's been unmailed again, remember, to fool spirits into not being prejudiced against her based upon her maleness or her gender. She hasn't really got much maleness at this point, I don't think. She says, bearing in mind what Mictlantecuhtli has just said, "You're not real. I'm not scared of you. Show me what you really are." Boo! And as soon as that is said, Papalotl disappears. Not very scary after all. She turns into the red dot, the spear. I think one of the few spoilers that I've done is to say that that's Barbalith, and we'll get into that much more, as we go down the line. But for now, we realise that this red circular motif that people are in throughout the course of the book are encountering at these points of initiation are related, and they're this red dot, and this red dot is somehow the thing that exists behind the gods. The red dot is the face that is masked by what a god is, which makes it pretty metal, right? Continuing on to page 16, we flash forward into a later part of Hildy's initiation, a stage that we haven't seen yet, where she is taught to manifest the magic mirror for the first time. That's kind of important because obviously a lot of what's happened in this issue is happening through Fanny's incident with the magic mirror in the nightclub toilets. I love the Council of Witches vibe. We know who Hildy's grandma is, and we know that maybe Hildy's auntie is involved in her magical training as well. But basically, this is just like there's just dark-eyed women around, and they're all kind of watching while Hildy emits the magic mirror from her mouth for the first time with great surprise. The violet superfluid sorcerers produce from their bodies condensed soul stuff which comes from outside. Suddenly she is seeing everything, all at once, all past, present, and future, rippling across a trembling hymen. More V stuff there. Across its surface is the lightest breath across its surface is sufficient to alter the fragile structure of time and space, and so, against the wishes of the others, because she's an invisible, she disobeys. She blows gently, and the membrane shivers. So this is like a point that we haven't even seen yet through on the course of Fanny's magical training, where she makes a decision which affects what happens in her bedsit. I'm calling it a bedsit, even though I think it's probably a one-bed flat with a separate kitchen and toilet area. It's more pulp, right? It's more 90s that it's a bedsit. The lads are still fighting. Etc. Great shot of Brody getting his face mashed in. You get the feeling that if the circumstances were somewhat different, Fanny would quite enjoy watching these sexy lads going at it like this. But there are some stakes. We've seen this in previous episodes, but Jill Thompson is the master of putting floating bubbles around people's head to imply grogginess. Over on the next page, we have another ad break. It's for Vampire: The Eternal Struggle. It's the third month running that we've had it in the comic. I think that's it. I could do with some more, telling adverts. We know that Sarah last time worked on this universe, in this IP, and therefore it's even more invisible because it's got something to do with her, and she was paid for it, and that's great. And the guy still looks like Nick Rhodes from Duran Duran. Down, down, down. Over onto the next page. Bang! Uh-oh. It looks like King Mob's got the upper hand, but he knocks down Brody right next to where his gun has fallen. So Brody's got his gun. He's about to fire and kill King Mob, but Fanny throws herself at King Mob, knocking him out the way a bit, and the bullet, which I think was aiming for his head, hits him instead square in the tummy, and that looks really sore. It looks really sore. And the blood goes everywhere, and then we see this panel again, which a couple of episodes ago, or one episode ago, we were shown as Fanny was looking ahead into her future, and we kind of thought this could be Fanny being dead, and it's not. The blood is King Mob's, and also this is a future that she created at an earlier point of her initiation. This is actually, I don't know whether, I imagine that her waking up in time to jump in the way of and knock King Mob out of the way so he gets the bullet in the guts and not the head, was the move that she made to save a life, or to push the magical mirror, which is the super dense fluid object, which is kind of outside and inside and the same as all of unfolded creation here. Yeah, so she's not dead, so she made a choice to wake up so that she could not die, or at least not die then. She will die one day. And then the next panel is fantastic. So kind of the action's over, but actually we get before we move on to page 19, page 18, you've got to say it's a really great dynamic page. Like, we've had some really great fights a really good fight scenes, but like kind of broken up in this issue, and it climaxes with this great near like full page panel of King Mob being shot, and all of Fanny's all of her war paint stuff, her mirror, her non-magic mirror gets shattered. He's kind of came in as the big savior, and it didn't work out. He's in big trouble. It looks really painful, and it's a really good page. But over on the next page, the spread pages 19 and 20, it's kind of like the action kind of takes I'm going to say Tarantino-esque because it's the 90s and that's what we're doing. But look at how dynamic and packed and tense these panels are here. But actually, the action, the violence is finished. What kind of Tarantino's like contribution, his like original addition to the idiom of action. It's not like nobody else has ever done it before. But the thing that one of the things he's really good at when it comes to framing and staging action on screen is doing the kind of the setup and like payoff points, like before and after the action. So like the standoff, right? He's really good at ratcheting up the tension and the confusion at the moment before all the guns fire, and then he hits you with an interesting sort of like set of reactions after the guns have fired. And this is what we get here with this really squeezed in, really like nicely pulsing panels. He thinks that the dialogue that Brody gives here is not that important, I don't think, but he seems to twig that Fanny and King Mob are boyfriend and girlfriend, but I don't think that's really attested to elsewhere in the comic. But Brody uses it to shore up his own masculinity at given that he's just cheated to win the fight. Not cheated, but he didn't win in the hand to hand. He kind of tries to gather a bit of pride back by saying, "Oh, how would your boyfriend feel if he knew that he was gagging for me to give you one a minute ago?" And then again, she says, Fanny settles up with Mictlantecuhtli again here by saying, this one in my place. I think, again, the gun jamming or the gun failing to fire for whatever reason, this could also be an effect of the breath that Fanny breathes onto the magic mirror, onto the universal superstructure. That means that she doesn't get executed here, and that she is able to grab a shard of glass, whack it right into Brody's cock and beyond. I'm not sure that any of the blood vessels in the penis light are quite kind of, maybe because he's got maybe the whole point is because he's been in a fight, because he was really turned on with Fanny earlier, we can assume that maybe he's got a raging boner, and that would actually, in fact, the boner thing would go well with all the Mictlantecuhtli stuff, wouldn't it? So, basically what I'm saying is I don't think that getting stabbed in the dick would be enough to make you bleed to death as quickly as he does, but maybe if you had a stonk on, it would. So maybe that's what's happening here. Obviously, the unmanning of Brody here really plays into all of the themes that we've been talking about in this issue, not just this issue, but this story arc. And obviously it mirrors the symbolic wounds that Fanny has had to receive throughout the process of her initiation. I told you I was a witch, darling. Great line as she sort of passes out. I'm not sure what's made her pass out other than because really all that's happened to Fanny. Oh no, she's taken loads of drugs, hasn't she? Okay, so she took loads of drugs and then got kicked and then had a very sort of tense time. And I think it's the it's also a bit too much as she faints. And also she just needs to be unconscious for the rest of the plot to make sense. So that's what we're going to do. Okay, so then Tezcatlipoca arrives again, this time in the form of Darky, the ghost of Brody's cat that he mentioned to King Miles a couple of issues ago. He says he's just been neutered, which is quite funny. And the cat gives us an interesting read on a model of like spiritual existence, basically, that the territory that a spirit inhabits requires consciousness on memory on this plane to maintain the link. And he calls Brody his territory and marks it. And it's like, it relates to all of the stuff that we've been seeing relating to the magic mirror of the soul being inside, of the body being inside the soul, not the soul being inside the body. You can substitute soul for mind there, if that's more to your taste. But also, it's funny that he pisses on his face, and Brody, even though he's like bleeding to death with a wound exactly where you don't really want it, sees the funny side, and as his face kind of turns vaginally red, he dies and he's gone. And yeah, we're meant to think that this, it's interesting that he's obviously at the point of death, he's close enough to see a spirit. The only spirit that cares enough about him to bother turning up at the moment of his death is a cat, and the cat only does it to piss in his face and say, you belong to me, and you kind of always have. And then we say goodbye to Brody. He was a good baddie while he lasted. You got to have these strong men to rock up, and fuck off, basically. Continuing over on the page 21, we kind of get a nice happy, the sun rises. Young Hildy is at the temple. She's left the land of the dead. She's back here. She's being spoken to by Teotihuacan. No, Christ, I've got that wrong. What's the name of her? Prize, if you could get to it before I remember what it is. Tlazolteotl, her butterfly totem goddess, spirit guide friend. And Hildy says, and that's where his story ended, referring to Brody. That's where it all ended. I forgot her name again. Tlazolteotl says, you should know that now that nothing begins, nor does it end. All things are ever present. And then, so is my initiation over, little butterfly, or has it just begun? How should I know? I'm only a butterfly after all, and must attend to my own business. What I really like here is this panel, where you get this view from above, and it looks like the butterfly has literally is like a graft onto Fanny's head, obviously right where her third eye should be, but also like just like an unfolded dimensional cross section of her head, like a hyper skull, a hyper head that she's got on, which kind of shows us the way that her being and the being that, or the beingness that this butterfly is and also represents, part of Fanny's body now, right? See, the sun is opening like a flower. A new day begins. Remember, this youngster is obviously still tripping balls, and she's like, "Woo!" when she realizes that the pretty rough night through the land of the dead is behind her, and the sun's all beautiful, and it's the best dawn ever. She also kind of understands at this point that, that there are other bad points in her life to come, but that this sun will always be here, because she's been able to have that perspective on her life. One of the really good things about this issue and this arc, which is a testament to the way it's been written and the way it's been drawn, is that the fractured non-linear narrative slots into place with the linear conception of Fanny's life and initiatory path brilliantly, and in a way which kind of really works nicely within the dramatic structure of the narrative. So what do I mean by that? So this is at the end of the arc, basically, this page on this kind of like bright new dawn on page at the bottom of page 21, and this is also the kind of and it's the end of the story, or of this, like I say, this story arc, and it's a happy one. The other points of crisis that she's going to face in her life are all folding back into a timeline, which is nevertheless not a linear one, but a jumbled one, like we've been reading, but it kind of still lands dramatically at the point of resolution where you want it to. And the comic here, in so doing, kind of, for a comic which is all like, hey man, the nature of reality isn't reality, and time is a circle and a loop and a sphere, that where every point of the sphere is touching every other point of the sphere. For all of that, it also uses narrative, albeit fractured ones, that kind of show themselves to not be that fractured upon the appropriate beat. It shows you what the kind of the purpose of seeing time from the linear perspective that people see it from is. So that kind of, and it kind of slots that back into the big picture. You know, if you kind of come to a realization that time isn't A, B, C, D, E, but is actually, all over the place, then you can kind of be like, well, what's the point in having this linear perspective? Shouldn't we be living like four-dimensional beings all the time? And it's like, well, A, you already are, and B, this is the point of having a linear narrative into it. Even if those linear narratives are that kind of human concept of the way of how you measure time or how you experience time, even if that isn't straight and normal. Over onto the next page, we have an ad break for the Jamie Delano and David Lloyd John Constantine Hellblazer spin-off book, The Horrorist. We spoke a bit about this. I told you about my little adventure with it, of finding it signed when Sarah mentioned it last episode. You could say, I mean, it's quite clear how this fits into the episode, because the horrorist, that's her there, the big face, is Hildy, obviously, and Constantine, you could say, is probably Brody, right? Kind of faintly anachronistic model of appropriate masculinity. Hildy, and it says, she is humanity's pain. Obviously, we've seen that, this fits very well with what we've seen in the issue. We know that Hildy's, Fanny's magical mission, if you like, is to kind of absorb the world's pain and be brought low by it, and through that, and to transmute that into something golden again, into something better. And it says that she's also John Constantine's last hope. in the same way Fanny was Brodie's last hope to not be the asshole that he'd always been, but unfortunately he didn't do that. He could have just had a really nice night with Fanny, right? But he didn't. He chose money, he chose his gun, he chose Sir Miles. And actually through this magical act, that 70s 90s thing, that kind of retro model of masculinity, was kind of put into hibernation for 20 years or so. At least it was kind of subsumed under a bunch of other models, although it's kind of reared its head with a bunch of digital in a rather horrible way in the West in the past 2 or 3 years. It never really went away, but yeah, it was backgrounded. The horrorist is interesting. Horrorism is violence done sort of against innocence or the helpless, kind of for its symbolic impact. It's kind of got a human sacrificey, bloodletting connection to it, which kind of makes us think of all of the various bloods that have been part of Hildy's initiation process. But horrorism is when it is up in your face, when you can't really deny its presence anymore, when the affect of terrorism is kind of just part of the scenery and becomes normalized. Horrorism is left, that you're not frightened of the violence kind of that is present in everyday life. You are horrified by it. You're in it and it's horrific, and that's the experience of violence in the 21st century. It's really interesting. Here's a good. So in 2011, Adriana Cavarero, an Italian academic working out of, I can't remember. I wanted to say it was like Ferraro or Venice, which would tie us back to all of the, proto-Illuminati stuff that we had in Arcadia. I don't think it is, though. I think it's some other Italian city. But she wrote a book in 2011 called Horrorism. This predates that by 16 years. I'm not the biggest fan of Jamie Delaney's writing, but conceptually, this is dynamite. This is bang on stuff. Cavarero says, horrorism is, so to speak, a radical rejection of care. It's a wound inflicted precisely where care was most needed. This is all, just think, this is Hildy, this is Fanny, right? She wants to just love, okay? Therefore, the violence strikes more deeply at the dignity of the unique bodily life that is harmed. Or better, because horror is a form of violence that is made possible by the heightened vulnerability of helplessness, it also implicitly reveals this dignity. Okay, that's Fanny when she's considering suicide in the bathroom and after her rape ordeal, right? A form of violence that is made possible by the heightened vulnerability of the victim's helplessness, which implicitly reveals this dignity. The kind of indwelling unique dignity of the violated subject, right? So this is crazy by this point, how well this plays into some of the themes that we've been exploring in this issue. Martin Amis wrote before Cavarero in 2006. He wrote a series of rather, unsurprisingly long essays for The Guardian, I think it was, about us living in the age of horrorism, about the enemy not being at the gates but in your face. So Delano beats them by a decade, and it's really interesting to note that all of this swinging London Britpop stuff that we've been skirting around in this issue and later issues, ones to come, Amis was really key in enunciating that through his 1989 novel London Fields, which kind of burlesques post-war class relations in the UK to a point where they seemed absurd enough that, like, Blur and Blair could pretend they didn't exist anymore, or were relics, or were things that we could imagine had disappeared, and therefore opening up the space to create a classless society. I mean, this is kind of the racism of Amos's point is absurd. That the decades and centuries of violence visited by the Western nations upon the global South, which is what the horrorist is about, It's about, pardon me, it's about someone who's been a victim of, US foreign policy, finding themselves in the US and paying back the horror, basically. And Constantine is like, hey man, you can't do that. I've got to try and help you through this somehow. Amos was perfectly happy for that to go on for decades, and then as soon as somebody crashes a couple of planes into a building, as soon as suicide bombing becomes a thing which is used effectively against Western sensibilities, suddenly we live in the age of horror, as if all of the exported violence that our wealth is built upon didn't mean anything. It's crazy. This comic itself, I think it's a bit of a chewy read. I think, to be honest, I think it could be written more elegantly, written a bit less. But the core concept is incredibly strong. Like I said, Delano got there by a decade ahead of great intellects like Martin Amis and Cavalera, who I'm definitely not saying is as much of a dick as Martin Amis is, of course. And Delano is very clear where the actual violence that we deal with in our lives stems from. It's the good old-fashioned American or Western military-industrial complex, and he isn't a massive racist coward about it. He's really upfront about it, and he's very dour and bleak about it. And when you're dealing with nasty stuff like this, why wouldn't you be? Yeah, and also the art by David Lloyd, it should kind of go without saying, and you can tell from the advert, from the poster, the interior art is that good as well. That's not just good art for the poster or for the cover. All of the interiors are as evocative as that. And David Lloyd's, he's as good as you think he is. So I would definitely recommend that you should read The Horrorist if you can track it down easily enough, because there's a lot going on there, and a lot of it's very good. Fanny descends the pyramid. She walks down the mountain, gets into a car with her grandma, who says, "You'll make a fine sorcerer, good as any woman." She's been kind of nasty, Fanny's grandma, and she will be again. We've seen that. Or it's not nasty, but she knows that the witch's path is tough, and she's kind of, she's going to make you go through it. But she does love Hildy, and she presents her with this wonderful gold lipstick that Fanny puts on. And again, it's kind of outside of the dreamland. It's this kind of feminine, vaginal, we love the word, guys, interiority being expressed onto the exterior body. Compare it to all the other times that she's had a red mouth, especially in this issue, but in the preceding issues as well. And I think from this point within the Invisibles narrative, I think from this point on, after Fanny here says, "I had become a woman," I think she's just gendered as a woman. I think we maybe see her not in, I think we see her like with her, I'm just trying to remember what's happened in later issues. I think she kind of doesn't have a wig on a couple of times, whatever, but it doesn't make her any less of a woman. And all of the stuff that we've been through with Brody and through her initiation, reflecting on it from this point, having spent 3 issues, 3 months slagging off the way that, not slagging off, but just kind of pointing out the kind of the weaknesses in the way that Morrison's casting of a transgender character has been. Actually, this is kind of like it's easy to look upon these 3 issues as an educative process, which leapt trans representation in not just in comics but in popular culture forward years. Like a lot of like conceptual and symbolic and meaningful work has been being done by these pages and the pages in the preceding 2 issues. And obviously it didn't arrive us at paradise, but it brought us a hell of a long way very economically. And having always been, and I'm very kind of inclined to, especially having finished this reading, I'm very inclined to look upon this as an extremely sort of positive and productive representation of trans issues, basically. What have I got? I've got a note here. It is very good storytelling, the way that the non-linear, time-bound narrative reinserts itself into the linear sense of Fanny's becoming at this point in our story, at this 23-year-old point in her life. So she becomes a woman on the drive home from the pyramid, and she becomes a woman tonight here in London, and she fixes her depression, as well as settling her karmic debt with Mictlantecuhtli. That's Fanny's happy ending. I don't know about you, but we've been on a real journey with her in these past 3 issues, and she's a very easy character to fall in love with, right? She's really cool in the same way that it's really easy to just be like, for all of his faults, to be like Jack Frost, Dane McGowan. His lovable qualities are lovable, and you do love them. Same with Fanny here. We've it's a different process and a different mode of storytelling and a different type of kind of like character identification, but she's really easy to love and to hold to your heart and to do that thing that you do with fictional characters, right? Where you begin to invest in their well-being. Her life isn't going to immediately get better, as we will see, but we don't have to worry about her personal problems quite as much anymore, which is great, because they've been fixed by the initiation process, right? You just got to drink trippy tea in the woods. It's cool. On the next page, page 23, really dramatic framing here. I really like these kind of like shots of Brody lying dead and Brody and Fanny kind of framed in this strange tableau fashion. We're just getting these interesting cinematic kind of cropped shots to show us the scene from Sir Miles's perspective as he enters enters the scene at Fanny's flat. We get, the control of our lines of sight here is really deliberate and strong and impactful. And Jill Thompson, as we've established by now, is a freaking genius. And then boom, over on page 24, we get, Sir Miles is very happy. He's doing the weird thing with holding his hands behind his back again that Brody was doing a couple of issues ago. I think that might just be how Jill Thompson draws people's hands behind their back. He's like King Mob. Gentlemen, I'd rather think we've just bagged King Mob. And King Mob is in all kinds of trouble here. He's bleeding out really badly. He's been gut shot. We know that a belly wound is not not immediately fatal, but it's very painful. And this is about as dramatically, oh shit, this is bad for our heroes, a climax to what has otherwise been has already, by this stage in these 3 issues, you realise that all the stuff with Fanny, that's our payoff. That's us being like, phew, we can relax. Because here, it's like you can't relax. It's very tense and dramatic all of a sudden. And it's excellent, excellent storytelling, set-up-y stuff. We know from Tarantino again. I'm sorry for referencing him so much, but it is the 90s. We know that you can be shot and survive as long as the narrative needs you to be alive. You can be shot in the stomach and be alive for as long as the narrative needs you to be alive. That's just a thing. Also, look at the kind of the wreckage of Fanny's flat. She's not going back there in a hurry, is she? And Sir Miles has got Fanny and King Mob now. This is bad. Next, London. That London. And that's the end of the issue. But we've still got the letters page to go. The letters page is a weird one, which we'll get into why it's weird next time. Because next time it gets really weird. But basically, this letters page has been printed out of order. It should have been printed in issue. This is the letters page, issue 16, but it's been printed in issue 15, which, for reasons which will become obvious next time, is kind of potentially really like, that was a bad time to make that mistake. So Morrison starts off the kind of intro bit to the letters page with, hope no one's gone blind after last issue, otherwise they'll have missed the wonderful work of foaming Beach Boys fanatic Paul Johnson in this month's story. It makes no sense whatsoever, but it will make sense next month. There's some chaos magic stuff in the next Invisible Ink. And you can infer this, that's not even a spoiler, you can infer this from reading the intro here, that Morrison in what was supposed to be the issue 15 letters page talks a lot about chaos magic, and here he provides some more kind of like reading reference materials that people can follow up. Shortly after reading this, in the kind of way which is fairly typical of the Invisibles by now, I'm just trying to see if they're to hand behind me. They're not. But 2 of the books that he recommends, Prime Chaos and Condensed Chaos by my favourite writer on the subject, Phil Hine, I found both of them in a charity shop for £1 each, just shortly before starting on the She-Man arc. It was a few months ago now, but they were £1 each. One of them's got a intro by Morrison himself. I had kind of read them before when I was a young man, when I was a very young man, and I'd even done some exercise in them. But to find them both again was at just the right moment. Was really good for so cheap as well. It's not enough to simply read these books. You must perform the exercises they contain. All right, I did. If you do, and admittedly it takes a bit of time, effort, and discipline, I can absolutely guarantee that at worst you will feel happier, more confident, you will be more fluid and adaptable, more successful, more optimistic, and more healthy. At best you will find you have become, much to your surprise, an ascended and illuminated master. Let us please. Or you could go mad. You could go very mad. Just be careful. We'll do more on that next issue. Chaos Magic Chat. Good fun. Into the letters. This one we've had a letter from this guy before, Mark Hayden Fraser from Oconomowoc, Wisconsin. Probably still the best place name. Yeah, it's kind of like an these are letters that are responding to Best Man Fall, the Bobby Murray issue, where we see the life, the tragic life of just a stooge who gets shot in issue 1. You remember, you were there. Then there's another letter from a guy called David, but like Mark Hayden Fraser's, it's a bit like Joshy, it's a bit jokey-wokey, it's not very good. David Zela, he's got a very cool name, David Xela, which I'm pronouncing Zela, or maybe it's Chela. Address not included. Smart lad. Well done, David. He's worried that the Invisibles might not be selling enough and might get cancelled, and then he asks a couple of questions. And he says, I like the comic. Morrison's reply is somewhat illuminating and, again, feeds into some of the stuff we're going to talk about next time. The sales have been lower than I'd like, but cancellation can be avoided, I hope. So this is like talking about the Invisibles. It's at this point in its publication, no one's buying it, no one's reading it. It ain't long for this earth. It could be in trouble. It could be in worse trouble than King Mob. Last month, I read Swamp Thing, which his buddy at the time, Mark Millar, was writing, I seem to recall. Spawn, which Morrison was maybe in the process of writing for. Wildcats. I'm trying to remember who was working on Wildcats at this point. I don't think Alan Moore or Travis Charest had got on there yet. Maybe they had, though. That would justify reading it. And Astro City, which is a kind of what if you lived in a city where everyone was a superhero, or what if you lived in, it's a bit like a real life imagining of, not real life, but like if you lived in Gotham City or Metropolis or Marvel New York. Astro City kind of takes like a ground level look at that. Astro City, do we still like Astro City? I can't remember. I used to like it back then. You can definitely see why Grant Morrison likes it. And then this is another response to another of the questions that David Zella asked. There are many different kinds of magicians. Some are born into magical traditions, particularly in indigenous cultures, but it's also possible for anyone to learn and make use of so-called magical techniques. There's a build here, but we've got the build completely out of order, which is presumably was quite frustrating for Morrison at the time. We'll talk about why. The next and final letter from this issuesode is from one of the bad guys, room 13, Hotel Hell, Seattle, Washington, 98101. I'm reading out the full address because I don't think it's real. Although maybe the 98101 Seattle, Washington is. Maybe, like, it just seems a bit half-assed to make up a funny fake address and then give them like your real postcode. Anyway. He writes quite one of the bad guys he references Twin Peaks Firewalk with me in the letter, which gets some points, as well as Blade Runner and The Wall. But he writes a nice kind of hey I got this one letter about Dead Man Fall, about the Bobby Murray issue. I don't think he does the thing which I'm worried about, that there seems to be just because you complicate the reading of Bobby Murray as an evil monster, and I've said this millions of times before, and I'm sorry for repeating myself, just because you complicate and subvert that reading of Bobby Murray as an evil monster, it doesn't erase the fact that he's also an evil monster. It just doubles it. You place the idea against its own opposite, and you've got a bigger idea. But you don't forget that Bobby Murray's a monster. Okay, both of the positions, that he's an innocent victim and that he's a monster, are true. So just because you've been shown the innocent bit doesn't make the other bit disappear. Okay, you just have to sit with the fact that both of them are there. That's the complexity. Not that you kind of go, you see, we're all just victims of a circumstance, aren't we? It's like, yes, you are, and no, you're not. Both of those are true. Morrison, it's quite a long letter, though. Morrison doesn't have a good chance to reply. We just go straight into the next issue. Bad news for Baldy. King Mob is finally in the hands of the enemy. He's strapped to a dentist chair. They've got scalpels, a copy of physical interrogation techniques, and all the time in the world. The wondrous Phil Jimenez and John Stokes bring their artistic talents to part one of the three-part entropy in the UK. It's not that. That's not the issue that we've got. We've got the issue that he's already referenced about by Beach Boys fanatic Paul Johnson to come next. And that's a London one, and it's just kind of like we'll just spend the whole issue with Dane again. It's a really good issue in my memory. I haven't actually reread it yet, but I remember liking it a lot. I think it's got some great like pop culture references in it. I think Paul Johnson was obviously in it at the time, and it's great. You can tell. So this little next issue bullet that we've got from Morrison here is bad news for Baldy. I resent that. That we've got from Morrison here is a nice little preview, not of next issue, but the next issue but one. And frankly, he makes it sound brilliant. The interrogation of King Mob, where we'll, presumably and definitely, we'll find out his origin story. Final ad break. We've had this one before. We've got a purple sphere and a kind of a kindly, concerned-looking angel looking on at it. That's quite invisible-y. What am I going to say at this point? That's quite invisible-y. On the next page, we've got two more. So this is the inside back cover. Forgive me. I think I referred to it as the inside front cover earlier on, and I didn't mean to. It's an advert for Halloween: The Curse of Michael Myers. That's Halloween. Oh God, Halloween 6, I think. It's the 90s one, which means that they kind of bring in like a conspiracy subplot into the Michael Myers thing, and it kind of tries to explain his origin through this kind of satanic panic, almost, but not quite, like US folk horror thing of like a conspiracy of local dignitaries from Haddonfield, which is like where all of the Halloween stuff is set. They kind of place a curse on Michael Myers, and he becomes, and that's what makes him evil and unkillable. It's that one. Do you like have you seen the Halloween films as many times as I have? Maybe have, maybe haven't. This is the Paul Rudd one, where you see a very young Paul Rudd, and Paul Rudd is ageless. He looks the same. He doesn't. You can see the bits that are pinched at the sides, and his face is too young to not have any grey in his hair. I'm sorry. I like Ant-Man just as much as you do. Probably a bit more. I like Ant-Man probably a bit more than you do. But we can't just pretend that everything is fine with Paul Rudd. We need to allow him to grow old gracefully, because this I can't grow old thing that he's got is going to hurt him in the long term. Okay? We're already into the long term, for God's sake. But watch Halloween 6, The Return of Michael Myers, because it's got a genuinely very young Paul Rudd in it. He's even credited here as Paul Stephen Rudd. It's even before he was in Friends or anything. It's just like it's a really early role for him. Because it's the 90s, this is probably, and because it's got this conspiracy backstory for that kind of unnecessarily tries to explain the origin of Michael Myers, and subsequent films kind of just go, yeah, did that really happen? Maybe not. It's not important, because it's not important. It is quite an invisible-y one. The white face the knife, or at least not the white face, but like the kind of the false face and the knife. You can connect that to previous Invisibles baddies, if you like. The name of the Satanists, of the evil cult who turn poor innocent baby Michael Myers into evil Michael Myers, are called the Cult of Thorn, Turisaz, the ancient rune, Turisaz, right? It means giant. It's all very interesting. There's some great, like, from what they're called, the rune poems, the kind of the translations, or not the translations, but like the little description poems that we have that survive of the runes. Turisaz means giant and it means thorn. There are some great, like, to describe what the meaning of this thorn, which relates to Michael Myers from the Halloween movies, some of the ways they describe them are great. Turisaz is torture of women and cliff dweller, and husband of a giantess, Saturn's Thane. Thane means like servant. That's from the old Icelandic rune poem. From the Anglo-Saxon one, the thorn is exceedingly sharp, an evil thing for any servant to touch, uncommonly severe on all who sit among them. So like this gigantic elemental force of nature is the kind of is the mojo that the evil cult inject into Michael Myers. It's not the best one. It's not the best one. The first one's probably the best one, but this is not a bad one. None of the Halloween films are that bad. Come on, be fair. None of them are that bad. This one has got a very, I think it's his last performance of any film, actually, but certainly his last Halloween one. It's the last one with Donald Pleasance in it. He gives a very old, but, shrill performance, like in shrill in a good way. Performance is Dr. what? I'm annoyed at myself for not being able to remember. What? The doctor that Donald Pleasance plays in the Halloween movies. I think he died between filming it and it coming out. I think it was a posthumous release, which is very Halloweeny. It says coming this fall. Really, you want to release, films had longer shelf lives back in 1995. And I think this Halloween movie was released in early September, which is crazy. You want to release it now, you have to release it literally on Halloween weekend. Otherwise, nobody wants Halloween anymore. I quite like. I think the Halloween TBC, The Curse of Michael Myers. It doesn't have a number, but it should. You want it to. It's helpful for it to have a number. I quite like it. Terror never rests in peace. We've learned that about Orlando in this episode, right? Right, we're nearly there. Nearly at the end. The final advert is this one for Aliens, a comic book adventure. It's a 1995 video game by Mindscape Studios. Now, I don't know. I mean, this is just kind of like me, I guess. But this here picture of the alien. I mean, okay. So we know that the rule is that the final back page advert tells us what's happening in the next episode of The Invisibles. And yes, literally it does. It bleeds acid. It can read your mind. See, it can read your mind. Is that a thing in the alien mythos that aliens can read your mind? I know they're kind of got good instincts for tricking people who are hunting them. But can they read your mind? The ones in The Invisibles can. So this tagline here, apart from the bleeding acid bit, that it can read your mind has got no reason to be there other than that it tells you what's going to happen in the next issue of The Invisibles. That is weird. It is a born killer. It is the least of your worries. It's the least of your worries. I think it's because it's not a puzzle game, but it's the kind of game where you've also got to, as well as avoid getting eaten by an alien and maybe even hunting an alien. In space, evil wears many faces is the other tagline. Obviously, Orlando wears many faces. Yeah, there's a lot of Orlando's only in this episode as a ghostly presence, but he's really in it. He's really, really in it. I should probably have paid more attention to, the formations of the post-Aztec settling of Central and Southern America. But I didn't. I'm sorry, because probably there's some nation-building stuff in there as well. Anyway, yeah, in space, evil wears many faces. Sorry, before I got sidetracked. I don't know if it's just you or if it's just me. This here, this. Oh, it's the least of your worries. Sorry to go back. It's the least of your worries because you've got to solve all these other problems. You've got to, stop the oxygen from running out of the spaceship or whatever, and avoid getting eaten by an alien. This is my aesthetic. Maybe it's yours too. But this early 90s, sorry, 90s early video games graphics of, not just anything, but of an alien, this is what I like. This is who I am. This advert, things don't get much better than this advert for me. I like these things too. I really like these things. I like this advert a lot. Aliens, a comic book adventure. Somebody has done playthroughs on YouTube. It's a fairly difficult game to get hold of, I understand, these days, but they put up full playthroughs on YouTube. They're kind of boring, but the look is very looky. And there's music, which is kind of like, again, crude video game music from the 90s. And again, you'll know if that sounds like something which you're going to enjoy or not. I would, if you've got 10 minutes, spend 11 of them watching YouTube videos of playthroughs of this game. I did, and it was time well spent. So yeah, I don't think aliens can read your mind, but I know some aliens who can, and we're going to look at them in our next issue. That's it. That's the episode done. Support us on Patreon. Tell me off on twitter.com/BobsyMindless. Yeah, go to the Diane Patreon page. Do all the good stuff. Be back here next month. Tell your friends that we're going to do some more invisible stuff next month, and it's cool for rad lads, okay? And ladies, and anyone else. Cheers for watching. Bye.